And thank you for the opportunity to speak to it.
Dr. Cam Calder.
Mr. Speaker, it was a harrowing and poignant experience serving on the Transport and Industrial Select Committee, hearing submissions on the Health and Safety Pike River Implementation Bill. As we have heard, two members of our committee, Kevin Haig and Chris Ockenvold, personally knew men who lost their lives in the Pike River disaster. It made our consideration of this legislation very personal, and we could share their very real pain of their loss through their close proximity to us when we were considering these submissions. This bill had its genesis in tragedy. It's the earnest wish of all of us on the Select Committee, and I'm sure all of us in this House, that through the provisions contained within this bill, future tragedies may be averted.
5 minutes, Sue Moroney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rise to speak to the Work Safe New Zealand Bill, third reading of this bill. The right to go to work, to leave your loved ones in the morning and come home safe and unharmed is a pretty basic right. And in this instance, that right was not upheld. 29 of these men, they left in the morning and they never returned. And they may never return from where they currently are. And this bill is one chapter in the book of things that we need to learn from this disaster. So Labor is supporting the third reading of this bill because this is part of what we have learnt from this tragedy. You know, in a previous decade it was Cave Creek. It seems that pretty much every decade in this country we need to remind ourselves about the importance of workplace rights. It seems that about every decade we need to go through the misery and the tragedy and relearn lessons that we've learnt before. I hope that this is the last decade that we will have to revisit these types of remedies. Because, Mr. Speaker, some of the things contained in this bill, some people might think it's the first time that they've ever been contemplated, but actually if you look back through history, some of these are things that we once had and that were stripped away in the name of deregulation. In the name of having the market actually, the invisible hand of the market was going to fix everything. And if there's one thing that I can say during this debate that I hope will resonate in this debating chamber for all the years that it needs to, can we please never have to learn the lesson again? Can we please never have to learn the lesson again through losing lives? That the market and deregulation doesn't keep people safe at work. It doesn't keep people safe. And that regulation is an important factor of actually having civilised, decent workplaces where people can actually have that expectation of that basic right to earn a living and not to die from it. The basic right to earn a living and not to die from it. Mr. Speaker, while there are some inadequacies in this bill, we would have much preferred that all of the recommendations from the Royal Commission had been followed. They have not. I genuinely hope that I'm not back, or other MPs in the future are not back to stand up and revisit that in the future. But it would be useful if the government did actually, when it had inquiries of any nature, that it actually picked up all of the recommendations and didn't cherry-pick recommendations, because I think that is another disaster waiting to happen. When governments actually don't look at the whole picture and just cherry-pick pieces that they feel comfortable with, then we are doomed to fail yet again. So, Mr. Speaker, I also want to echo the words of my colleague Darian Fenton to urge the government to not believe that it has fixed the problem because of the passing of these bills this afternoon. This is but one chapter. It's but one chapter in what needs to happen. That in the broader context, actually having people valued and their voice valued and their work valued in their workplace, and not taking the approach, as the government has in other pieces of legislation, of stripping away workers' rights, that's the context in which this bill needs, these series of bills need to sit. And I think that the government does need to stop and pause and think about the broader context of what constitutes a decent and fair and safe workplace. Mr. Speaker, the last thing that I will say in the course of this debate is to acknowledge the loss that the families have endured, to encourage the government to make good for those families. They are still suffering. They will continue to suffer for a very long time. This is just but one chapter. I'm pleased that the Parliament today is taking this move, but there is so much more to do in honouring those men and their families and the tragedy that has taken place.
Catherine Delahunty.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker. Tēnā koutou.